Bill, you're muted.
Sorry about that rookie mistake. I'll try again. Hello, everyone. I'm Bill Falls, Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, and it's great pleasure that I welcome you here today to honor Katie Gough, Associate Professor in the Department of Theater and Dance, as one of our 2020-2021 recipients of the CAS Scholar Teacher Award, which was formerly known as the Dean's Lecture Award. This lecture series dates back over 25 years and was designed to recognize faculty who are both highly respected scholars and exceptional teachers. As I said today, I have the pleasure of introducing Professor Katie Gough, who truly is the epitome of the scholar teacher. Katie earned her PhD in Performance Studies from the University of California at Berkeley. She joined our faculty in 2014 after holding positions at the American Conservatory Theater MFA program in San Francisco, the Department of Theater, Dance, and Performance Studies at UC Berkeley, and in the School of Culture and Creative Art at the University of Glasgow in Scotland. As Katie describes, she is an academic, a writer, and a theater maker. Katie has published an award-winning book, Kinship and Performance in Black and Green Atlantic, Haptic Allegories, and numerous journal articles, creative writing pieces, reviews, dictionary entries, and instructional literature pieces. The depth and quality of Katie's work is not only impressive, but she's received numerous awards and fellowships, including the Oscar Brockett Essay Prize from the American Society for Theater Research and the Brockett Center for Theater History and Criticism at the University of Texas at Austin, and the Errol Hill Award for Outstanding Scholarship in African American Theater, and Scottish Crucible Fellowship from the Royal Society of Edinburgh, and our very own Humanities Center Fellowship. Katie also has an impressive and considerable commitment to the students at UVM and is recognized as an outstanding teacher, which I'm sure that one of our students, Julia, will touch upon in a moment. We are very, very lucky to have Professor Gough as part of our university community. Congratulations, Katie, on this well-deserved award. We are looking forward to your lecture, but before we hear that lecture, let's hear a few comments from one of your students, Julia Katonis.
Thank you. As Dean Falls said, my name is Julia Katonis. I'm a senior here at the University of Vermont, and I am a theater major. It's a great honor for me to help introduce Professor Katie Gough for the College of Arts and Sciences Scholar Teacher Lecture. There's, of course, a great deal to be said about her scholarship, but I'm confident that Professor Bisa is going to cover that well. What I want to talk about is the second part of that title, which is the teacher part. I've had the pleasure and the privilege of taking 3 classes with Katie now in what we refer to in the theater department as the theater history cycle. In addition, I completed my junior year honors college independent study, and I'm now completing my thesis under Professor Gough's advisory. I think it's very possible to be an excellent scholar in one's field without being an excellent instructor of it, but Professor Gough is without a doubt remarkable in both. To be frank, the subject of theater history, as with many historical fields, is often overrun with exclusively the works of white men. Of course, many of these white men are important to know the work of, William Shakespeare, Samuel Beckett, and Henrik Ibsen, to name a few. But for many of my friends studying theater elsewhere, these men constitute the majority of their education in theater history. I feel incredibly lucky to say that in Professor Gough's class, this is decidedly not the case. Across the theater history cycle, we have indeed read works like The Tempest and A Doll's House, but we've also been able to explore international revolutionary reinterpretations of Antigone, the compositions of Benedictine abbess Hildegard of Bingen, and the rich tradition of racial melodrama in early 20th century America. Beyond that, these representations of theater's diverse history are not presented as aisles of their own, but rather as rooted in the same contexts as those works and creators who, for a host of social and political reasons, are better known. What Professor Gough does masterfully in her teaching is build a syllabus where the line from ancient Greece and China through medieval Italy and Renaissance England into 20th century America is not only unbroken, but easily and richly visible. I can't say there are many courses in which I've taken part in a conversation about the connections between a Baroque playwright and a 21st century immersive theater troupe, but such conversations are a staple in Professor Gough's classroom. The title of this piece, The Dying Arts, feels incredibly poignant in this uncertain time. As Professor Gough notes, theater has long been spoken of as an art form that, for one reason or another, is petering out, especially in settings like higher education. As we approach a year in the pandemic, a year in which theaters have closed and millions of actors, technicians, and artists have lost work, the notion of unmaking and remaking such integral human practices as art, ritual, and performance is more critical than ever. So to close, I want to emphasize that with her work as well as her teaching, Professor Gough is continually finding ways to inspire the next generation of artistic thinkers, not only in spite of, but perhaps even because of the great challenges they face now. So I would now like to hand off the metaphorical microphone to Professor Besaw.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Paul Besaw, and I'm the interim chair of the Department of Theater and Dance. And I am the third and the final introduction before the presentation that Katie will give in just a bit. I just would quickly want to say, speaking on behalf of Katie's colleagues in the Department of Theater and Dance, how proud we are to have her recognized this way with this award and lecture. So congratulations, Katie. I've been a big fan of Katie since before she arrived, since I was part of the search committee that hired her. And during that process, I got a chance to get to know her work a little bit and meet her. And I knew we would be really lucky to work with her here, someone of her caliber. Just having her in the department has been amazing resource. She does a lot of important things for us. Julia's talked a bit about her teaching. She teaches many important courses for our curriculum, including dramatic analysis, the theater history cycle that Julia mentioned, as well as playwriting, a diversity course on theater in the United States, as well as assorted honors college and first year seminars for many, many students. In her capacity as our resident dramaturg, she is a resource for all of the productions we do here in Royal Tyler Theater, and she brings her expertise, which Julia describes so well, to our practice of making theater and presenting that theater here. As Bill mentioned earlier, she describes herself as an academic, a writer, and a theater maker. And what I love most about Katie is seeing how she doesn't see these as separate and distinct categories. The academic, the writer, and the theater maker are all part of one process for her. And if you know her work, you can see how scholarly inquiry and the creative act go hand in hand. Her work encourages new ways to think past the old-fashioned notions and separations between scholarship and practice. And in her classes and in her work, she generates, you see how knowledge is produced in a process where theory and imagination are complete partners. You see the deep research into historical people and events comes together with her investigation of a very real and personal present, and how that informs how we can use theater and performance as a way to understand the world. She has a long list of accomplishments. Bill mentioned her award-winning book. She also has an award-winning essay, The Art of the Loop, Analogy, Orality, History, Performance, and her many original creations, including a play, Coracles, Castanets, and Catechus, which was presented here in town at the Flynn Center. And as a side note, I just want to say I love the titles of Katie's works because they're such a deep dive in and of themselves into the rich topics that she explores. But in all of her work, you see the depth of her intelligence and the breadth of her approach, just as always and completely evident. Katie's the type of colleague, when you run into her here in the building or on campus, you start with easy and friendly hellos. Hey, how are you? What's going on? What's the latest? And before you know it, you're talking about big questions and big ideas about theater, about performance, about the world, about the pandemic, about what's happening, how are we going to fix the world? And even though you don't have any answers in sight, you just are talking about big ideas and laughing the whole time. I love working with Katie because the work is always smart, it's always serious, but it's always fun at the same time. She's just a fantastic colleague, and she elevates the dialogue at every turn. I feel very fortunate to work directly with her and also to be collaborating with her on an original performance that will present in our theater and dance season in the fall of 2022. So I'm super excited about today's presentation and very proud to finally introduce Katie Gough. Here she is, Dr. Katie Gough, and her presentation, The Dying Arts.
Hi, everyone. Oh, wow. Before I start, I want to thank you, Bill, Dean Falls, for that introduction. Julia, your introduction overwhelmed me, and I'm grateful for you and the students and for your capacious mind. So thank you for that. And Paul, thank you. You're an incredible chair, a colleague, and friend. So it's a real privilege and a real honor for me to have received this award today, and it's one I certainly don't take lightly. So I'm gonna sort of dive right into things, but before we start, I just want to welcome everyone to my theater, my empty theater. You're all very welcome here. I know that there may be friends and family, as well as colleagues and students. There could be people here from many time zones, and I know that everyone is very busy and has looked at screens perhaps for a lot of the day. So so taking this hour to spend with me is not lost on me, and I'm very grateful for it. And with that said, I want to let you know that there's no PowerPoints or anything fancy that's going to happen on this screen this afternoon. So if you would like to just listen in, close your eyes, turn away from your screen, that is completely fine. So I'll start with an introduction. It's also just to let you know, about 30 to 35 minutes that I'll be reading, and then I'm happy to take questions at the end about what I read or about the larger project. So during my sabbatical in the 2018-19 academic year, I embarked on a series of journeys to a Catholic monastery, an afterlife awareness conference, a course on healing touch offered through the nursing program here at UVM, a course on the foundations of mediumship, the end-of-life doula professional certificate course through the Larner School of Medicine, and then to a sound healing course. My sabbatical ended with my attendance at a family constellation workshop on transgenerational trauma and healing. Now, admittedly, these are strange journeys for a theater professor, even one as strange as me. But let this be a lesson. If you go searching for mystical artists, know that you will travel into unknown territories. 3 decades of writing has taught me to trust my intuition and my research. And with that in mind, I made a pact to say yes to where my intuition told me to go. Whether this pact was with myself, with the artists, or with the universe, I cannot say. What I can say is that saying yes kept taking me to dying, to death, and to the afterlife in some way. It disturbed me greatly. So much so, I thought I was being led to my own death, which in a way, I guess I was. When I returned to campus in September 2019, I was confronted with how radically my landscape had changed. Everything seemed to be falling apart. By October, still following my instincts, I started training as a hospice volunteer. Was it accident that the other trainees in the group were a filmmaker, a retired art therapist, a singer, and a former dancer? Accident or synchronicity, the relationship between the arts and death started to resonate at a deep level for me. Thinking the two worlds together, the aging and dying body and my own artistic discipline, the dramaturg in me started to hear the deep subterranean pattern that resonated under all of the noise. They are both too expensive and don't pay for themselves. They are both considered useless or not usefully producing citizens or disciplines in an economically driven world. Thus, neither meets the demands of the time. And they are both considered anachronistic. In other words, no one even comes to see them anymore. I was sitting vigil with a dying patient in a nursing home 3 days before the state of emergency was declared. When the pandemic hit, the first industry to die was theater, and the first people to die were in nursing homes. The parallel was looking less strange, but no less curious than I had imagined. In September 2019, the book I was writing on sabbatical also died unexpectedly, though I had almost a full draft of the manuscript. Or maybe a better way of saying this is that in some inexplicable and undeniable way, the person writing the book died. The me who went into these experiences is not the same me who came out. I was bereft and lost for months. But slowly over the summer of 2020, I started over again without knowing where it was going. Doing what the artist had taught me to do, I started writing my way into an unknown future. So today, I'm going to read to you the beginning of what is very much a work in progress called The Dying Arts. It's a work of autofiction, although this project certainly did not start out that way. And it's comprised of a series of dialogues and performative lectures written for a course that is never taught because the discipline in which it might be delivered does not exist. Following two parallel trajectories, the main character navigates the death of theater in higher education and the synchronicities that led her to end-of-life doula work, hospice care, and healing practices. Thinking the two together through artistic mediums, mystics, and creative practices, the writer unwittingly begins to undo her academic training, only to be led in circles or in a loop back to a middle space between disciplines, between artistic mediums, and between life and death. So the first section that I'm going to read to you today is called Character Study, and it's based on what happens when I go searching for the medieval mystic, musician, dramatist, and polymath Hildegard of Bingen. So The Dying Arts, Part 1, Character Study. 1. Remember the time we are in class and you discuss Aristotle's Poetics, particularly the way he talks about character? You can have a tragedy without character, he says, though you're paraphrasing from a translation. But, and this is important, he says, you can't have a tragedy without action. Aristotle firmly believes that character comes in as a subsidiary to action. Later, you can't stop thinking about this, especially since you are preparing character studies. Now, if you take this whole idea outside of the world of the play and consider it as life, for instance, like maybe that life you were leading when you were on that sabbatical that takes you to the brink of, well, what exactly? It's still hard to know. You tell me that during this time, there is nothing stable about your identity. You keep appearing in places that are uncharacteristic, your word, and that's what keeps it interesting for you, but maybe for me too. The fact the activities are not in keeping with your character. This time you define that as disposition or temperament. Just like in a play, many times in life, you say, we understand our own drama through actions and obstacles. What does a character want and what is in the way? Performances are always relational. There is always a desire and always an obstacle to that desire. Even if the performer is solo, even if she is not acknowledging the audience, everything is still relational. All the same, you say, I prefer it if you and I are acknowledged. You tell me that this is why you keep comparing yourself to that artist. Unlike that artist who is a painter, you say, theater is the medium that takes you into the mystery. You know, the language of theater, how the story is plotted, how we must suspend disbelief, the way nothing in a story happens by accident, even accident. So what if you mapped out your journey by a dramatic action, noting the obstacles, the accidents? Still too big, you say. Start small, you say. Character study. How one comes to understand a character. What if the character you don't understand is yourself? What if the character seems like it's going in 5 directions at once? Is it an incoherent character, a weak character, or is it a foil? like a character that's pulled into a story to help you understand the protagonist, who is, it is always implied, the real character. Several years ago, while you're in therapy, you tell me you were surprised to discover that you were writing in your journal in the second person. To this day, you still don't know if you were writing to M, the therapist, or yourself. Either way, you say, you wonder about this other person who's with you. To be honest, you're beginning to sound creepy. You say it's maybe not so much a person, but something like a second persona narrator. Persona comes from the ancient Greek word that means mask, literally a thing to sound through, you say, avoiding my hard eye roll. You already told me this in class. This surprises you, you continue. You tell me you don't even notice at first, but then one day you look back through months of your journal and see that it has been your story for quite a while. Does this mean you were also a character? Or maybe you're just acting as if you were a character, since of course you were not, or not according to Aristotle, who, while not denying the importance of character, still lets us know that we can go through a whole drama without one. But not really, you say. Characters are still vehicles for action, and you can't figure out someone's character if they're just sitting there. You need to do something. And in all honesty, you're just sitting here listening to this sentence I wrote ages ago. But you can still suspend disbelief. You, along with the character who's sometimes also called you, can, through this suspension, inhabit the same reality. This still requires action. Aristotle was right about that. At least there's no way for you to meet these characters without a desire to enter their reality and without stumbling upon a number of obstacles. Or maybe you're trying to stumble into my reality and are also hitting some obstacles. This begs the question, who's the actual protagonist of this story? From whose point of view are we to understand the action? One point of view feels so limited, don't you think? This drama may work without characters, you say, but we do need personas. Sure, they're just a bunch of masks, you say, but personas do make some sounds, and that's something, you suppose. 2. Is there something specific to tragedy, you wonder, that requires action to come before character? Like, do you ever look back on a tragic event in your life and think, that changed me? I'm not the same person I was before that happened. The event does not need to be an Oedipus-sized tragedy, you know, with the plague and citizens dying and no one taking care of it and the leader thinking it's everyone but him. Spoiler alert, it's him. Maybe the event is not even one thing, because at the time, you don't actually know there is tragedy coming. You're just performing a series of actions that lead to your downfall without you knowing it. You're speaking to me as if we are in a play, and you see it's confusing me, because a play is not real life. You tell me a story about a former teacher, geography professor, you say, who often kicks off the discussion of the week's reading by asking the class, what is the dream of the writer? If you pause for too long, she might add, where's the love, y'all? No one ever asked you this before, you say, even though intuitively, you know that if something is worth writing, there is a dream attached. And if something is worth reading, it is to your benefit to understand that dream, to enter it with the writer and explore the world. What you learned from her question, you say, is that the dream worlds we enter need not be fictional. They can just as easily take place in the world, in actual geographical space. They can ask you to imagine reality from a paradigm so different than your common sense that the mere existence of such a place often feels like a liberation, reminding you of how little you actually know about who you are and what you're doing here. You trail off. You come back. All of this is to say, you say, that theater is a world-building project. And when you follow certain characters, you can't forget about the conventions of their world, the world they bring into being right here on Earth. You tell me that at the beginning of your sabbatical, you stay at a cloistered Benedictine monastery because you are searching for a medieval mystic. Hildegard of Bingen. You should know, you say, that time and space work differently on this planet. You mean your sabbatical planet? Who's the character here? You read so much about her, you say, but it doesn't get you anywhere. Every book provides facts about her character, you suppose, but not really anything about the actions that create her character. It's a hunch, but you think that visiting a convent where nuns still say their prayers 8 times a day by singing Gregorian chant might help you to explore her music and visions. Do the actions of chanting or singing take her to other worlds where she then produces all of those compositions? The compositions that make her the first known musical composer in the Western world. You do some research to see if a convent like this still exists. Would you believe it, you say, that there is a cloistered nunnery that still practices this tradition a 90-minute drive away? Totally bonkers, you say. You arrive to the convent, and as you walk through the door, a voice tells you that there is nothing inevitable about you being here. Second thing to note, you say, people hear voices on this planet. You remember another time you had this experience with the voices 4 years earlier. You arrive at a 10-day silent meditation retreat, a retreat you never think you have the desire or capacity to attend. Walking towards the building, you hear a voice say, "I can't believe you made it." Is it your voice? It's an excited voice, a voice that does not think that you being here will be a possibility. The voice does not say, "This is not supposed to happen," or "I always know you'll make it here," but expresses a level of incredulity. "I can't believe you made it." You tell me that you like to think that the voice is announcing that now that you have made it, anything is possible. Whether it's a grueling Buddhist meditation retreat or attending prayers 8 times a day to follow the Gregorian chanting of the nuns, one thing you realize is that this world is hard work. I mean, sure, you say, voices emerge from thin air, there's a feeling of mystery all around you, but it takes discipline. You're not sure you have it. Actually, you're mostly certain that you don't. 3. Does discipline build character? Is it through discipline that we understand character? You must admit, you say, discipline is a tricky word. You can say that Hildegard's discipline takes her somewhere else, but this too is twofold. You wonder if her discipline is her activity of prayer or chanting, or if her discipline is music as a field of study or expertise. For that matter, her discipline could be medicine or biblical exegesis or dramatic composition. In many respects, you say, she is lucky to live in a world where there are few borders between disciplines, even if they are all punishing and there is no penicillin. Is a field of study as a discipline the same as the activity or exercise of discipline? You think there is some distinction here, you say, but you've been institutionalized for so long, you say. No, you say, not there, you idiot. In the academy, you say, that you no longer know. You're defensive about my joke. What intrigues you about the question, you say, and the world in which this question is important, you say louder, is that depending on what you emphasize, it can lead you in different directions. And these 2 directions point to whether Aristotle is correct, that character comes in as a subsidiary to action, or whether we can understand someone's actions by first knowing their character. Are we simply the product of our actions? You seem to be speaking to yourself now, or some place in front of you and just above your head. Either way, it always comes back to Aristotle. The first definition the OED gives for discipline is found in a copy of the Rule of St. Benedict from 1225, the rule that Hildegard follows from the time she is tithed to the Benedictine monastery at the age of 8. She is the 10th child, the story goes, so her parents give 10% of what they own to the church. They give Hildegard as an oblate. The first definition reads, senses related to punishment or instrument of punishment, a whip, scourge. Not an auspicious start, you say. The next definition Read senses related to training, instruction, or method, and then you see what you are looking for, you say, which is more fitting with your character. Instruction is given to disciples, scholars, schooling, teaching. Also the result of this, education, learning. Curious, you say, that the first two mention the senses, while the third, the one you've been tithed to since the age of 18, begins with instruction. Does instruction not require the senses? You're beginning to see the problem with your discipline. Hildegard is an anchoress from the age of 8, walled up inside a living tomb with women committed to the renunciation of worldly things. Here she learns to read and write and pray. She takes vows as a Benedictine nun at age 18 and is unanimously voted the new magistra in 1136 after her beloved teacher Judah dies. At this point, she's about 38, you say, which is about 4 or 5 years before it all gets cosmic. There's no better narrator of Hildegard's medieval midlife crisis than Hildegard herself, translated from the Latin, you say. It's a bit long, but you really get how time and space work on her planet here. So this is Hildegard. And behold, in the 43rd year of my earthly course, as I was gazing with great fear and trembling attention at a heavenly vision, I saw a great splendor in which resounded a voice from heaven saying to me, "O fragile human, ashes of ashes, filth of filth, say and write what you see and hear. Explain these things in such a way that the hearer, receiving the words of his instructor, may expound them in those words according to that will, vision, and instruction." It happened that in the 1141st year of the incarnation of the Son of God, Jesus Christ, when I was 42 and 7 months old, heaven was opened and the fiery light of exceeding brilliance came and permeated my whole brain and inflamed my whole heart and my whole breast, not like a burning, but like a warming flame, as the sun warms anything its rays touches. And immediately I knew the meaning of the exposition of the scriptures. But I, though I saw and heard these things, refused to write for a long time through doubt and bad opinion and the diversity of human words, not with stubbornness, but in the exercise of humility, until laid low by the scourge of God, I fell upon a bed of sickness. Then, compelled at last by many illnesses, I set my hand to writing. While I was doing it, I sensed, as I mentioned before, the deep profundity of scriptural exposition. And raising myself from illness by the strength I received, I brought this work to a close, though just barely, in 10 years. It's a big ask of one person, you say. Hildegard has zero desire to write. The voice demands it of her. She can very well ignore the voice, you suspect. Would ignore it until her death, you emphasize, if it wasn't for those terrible headaches. There's a fine line between mysticism and madness, and she knows it, you say. Many will think she's mad. She knows she hasn't a choice. She can't live with those migraines and that voice. You're sounding less like a scholar than a confidant. Are we in a play here? She's about 43 years old when this goes down, you say, ignoring my question. You mention that you're slightly younger than 43 when you find her, but you stay interested in her, are compelled by her because of this change in direction in her 40s, this need to write, and not just write, because she wrote many letters and other things aside before the age of 43, but to write down her visions, to bring her dream world to earth, because she can't ignore the pain or the voice or her own true nature. You wonder if Hildegard ever thinks her discipline betrays her. What is it to lose your discipline? Have you ever felt betrayed by your discipline? These are some questions that come up for you, you say, when you think of Hildegard's disciplined monastic world. What you mean, you say, is that she follows the rule of Saint Benedict, the self-punishment, the study, the listening, the prayer, the chanting, with exactitude. And then sometime in middle age, Her discipline turns on her, or turns her inside out, or turns the discipline inside out, which may be all the same thing at this point. Her world has a structure. There is form. It is about repetition. It keeps her safe. She knows and practices the rules. She becomes an abbess, for fuck's sake. She is the rules. Hildegard knows how time and space work on this planet, how they are kept in place through the practice of the disciplines. But in her 40s, you say, she sees her time is up. All of her discipline takes her somewhere terrifying and mind-stopping and electrifying and maybe lonely too, because no one else in her world sees and hears how and what she sees and hears. They're still safe in their discipline. She stays in bed for so long because she knows it is the end of her world, you say. And you can't stop thinking that maybe that's why you do too. You hand me notes for a lecture you write and never deliver. You tell me to read it, and then I'll understand why. It's called The Annunciation of Hildegard of Bingen. I am walking through the door of the Monastery of the Immaculate Heart of Mary when I hear a voice whisper in my ear, "There is nothing inevitable about you being here." Then a nun greets me cheerily and shows me to my room for the next 4 days. In this cloistered Benedictine convent on the Vermont-Quebec border, the good sisters structure their day according to the sonic rhythms familiar to my 12th century Benedictine heroine, Hildegard of Bingen. Among other things, Hildegard writes 70 liturgical songs in our first known morality play. She becomes a doctor of the church on October 12th, 2012, 7 years after I become a doctor of performance studies. 900 years earlier, Hildegard is an anchoress, walled inside a living tomb. In Hildegard's day, it is customary for a bishop to say the office of the dead when an anchoress takes her vows, a symbolic death to worldly things. She learns to read and write and pray. A sympathetic monk passes her books on botany and medicine through the cell's small window. It's one of the gendered secrets of medieval monastic life that this living tomb gives her access to more knowledge than most women in the whole of Europe. In 1136, she is named magistra or spiritual teacher and gets a promotion, no longer anchoress, but abbess. A little later, she also hears from God again. This time he tells her that she needs to start writing down everything she hears and sees. She does not want to do this. She finally says yes when she, like me, is in her 40s. Her suffering is too great to bear saying no any longer. Afterwards, she's one of the most prolific creative forces the world has ever known. So begins the Annunciation of Hildegard of Bingen. I sit in a chapel by myself. I forget that the nuns are cloistered, that we will not share a chapel. Ahead and to my left, I see their shadows move behind an iron gate. I am here to follow the Latin prayers that punctuate the day at 8 intervals, sung in Gregorian chant. The list in my room reads as follows: Vigils, Lauds, Prime, Holy Mass, Sext, Non, Vespers, Compline. Listening to the chanting, I think of the first Annunciation, the one that Hildegard sets to song. The plot is simple. Gabriel arrives from his dimension and appears before a young woman to announce some game-changing news. Mary's job, should she choose to accept it, is to give birth to a whole new consciousness. She's a teenager. She must be terrified. And still, she says, yes, I will. Yes. As I listen to the Gregorian chanting through the bars of the iron gate, I don't feel I have a face. The rule of Benedict begins: listen carefully to the master's instructions and attend to them with the ear of your heart. I hear this phrase for the first time while practicing with a group of silent Sufis in Northern California. Sufis know how to listen like this. It is no easy matter. I return from the chapel, and in the silence of my room, I reread Henry Corbin's Mundus Imaginales, or The Imaginal World. Philosopher, theologian, and late professor of Islamic studies, Corbin is also interested in a 12th century mystic, a Sufi by the name of Suhrawardi. Corbin coins the phrase Mundus Imaginales to indicate a precise order of reality that corresponds to a precise mode of perception. Between the empirical world and the world of abstract understanding, there is, according to Corbin, an intermediate world. This world is as real as the world of the senses and the world of the intellect. Iranian Sufis refer to this world as the eighth climate, or nowhere. I have an acute sense that Hildegard reaches the eighth climate during the 8 periods of chanting each day, that she rides the wave of sound into some kind of directionless time field where she sees her visions with her ears. Corbin's essay is the most difficult I ever assigned to undergraduates. One student finally asked the question I know is on the tongue of the room. Do you actually believe they travel to this place? The question, in part, a check of my academic credentials, my impartiality, but I also hear something that sounds like longing. So I tell him that belief in the imaginal world is dependent on how seriously we take our internal reality. What is an internal reality? The class looks up, curious. I bring in Tibetan singing bowls. We practice seeing with our ears. We practice staying in liminal space, sitting, listening, not knowing. Everything happens in this space. Nothing happens in this space. Do we have enough time? How much longer can we avoid the tyranny of the quantifiable? In the 12th century, Hildegard is alive to see the birth of the university system, which for women is the death of higher education for the better part of the next millennium. I listened to the birth of the university from astride of the grave, women eclipsed from the small shaft of light that is available to some in that century. I begin my university education in the last decade of a millennium that begins with Hildegard's birth. Hildegard and I are among the first generation of women in the history of the world to hold a doctorate in the same number as men. A 900-year experiment, arising, passing away, arising, passing away. There is nothing inevitable about me being here, but I am here. I make a quick note to myself when I return from the monastery, and I find it in my journal while writing these notes almost 2 years later. Monday, September 24th, 2018. The university has been a kind of monastery for me, an institution that takes care as long as you follow its exacting rules and move your life wherever it may take you. It has served me well. I am one of the lucky few women who can say this. Being at the monastery and attending Mass, I feel like I am peering back on the life of an intimate stranger. It's been over 30 years since my regular attendance in this ritual. In the future, I feel university life will appear like this to me. 4. You see, you say, well, you can't answer the question about who the character is in this story or whose play you're in right now. You think you're searching for Hildegard, you say, but after you arrive, you're lost. You hear voices, and then you lose your face. Afterwards, you know nothing. You lose your discipline at that monastery, you say. Your rigorous, methodical, disciplined way of conducting research leads to your indiscipline or anti-discipline or unconscious uncoupling from your discipline. It's dangerous in a way, you say, this being taken somewhere else, the way some disciplines break something open, not through study, but through action. Then, not long after that visit, you find yourself in a yurt in rural Vermont. taking a sound healing course, sound healing, Tibetan singing bowls, vibrating on your body, you say. The bowls are beautiful, you say. Don't get me wrong, you say. It is incredible, you say. But you are not this character. Except, you say, that apparently you are. Aristotle 1, you 0. After the first day, you can't sleep. At midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., you still hear the bowls, still feel them in your body. You wonder sometimes if they ever stopped or if you have grown accustomed to the sound. You digress. The curious thing about being at the end of your world while you're still living in it is that there's no escape. Hildegard doesn't take off. Nothing exists outside of her world, you say. There's no prison break, no side hustle for a Benedictine abbess. Everything changes, but she's in the same life. At least that's how it appears, but that's just appearance. Her internal reality redesigns the outer reality, you say. That's the incredible truth of her world, that there is no such thing as inside and outside. Like a Mobius strip, each turns into the other. I mean, you say, she is dead, but that's no match for her character. She dies when her world ends, and yet there she is, with her character still kicking. Can't be afraid when you're already dead, you say. The Sufis call this ego death, dying before you die. Come to think of it, you say, surely other people call it this too. When her world ends, she shapeshifts into a bridge, you say. She manages to make her internal reality the new norm. Not just her new norm, but everybody's new norm. You start to get really excited about this. Maybe a bit too excited. The voices that only she hears, the music that plays only for her, the exquisite images that blind her with their light. She takes everyone along for the ride. And here's the paradox, you say, though you're uncertain if it's a real paradox. This isn't a magic carpet ride. She takes everyone along for the ride by redirecting their discipline. She makes her inner world into their outer reality through their actions. Volmar, her male secretary, writes down the visions that she dictates. The nuns who are skilled in painting create the gorgeous images that she supervises. The nuns sing the music she composes, and all of them, including Volmar, the only man, perform in the first known morality play, her Ordo Virtutum, or the Order of the Virtues. Whether it's drama or music or painting or visionary theological writing, these are all templates, teaching tools, you say, that allow others to join her by making these arts into disciplines. Exercises that, when practiced repeatedly, you say, and with rigor, you add, take her acolytes to another world, a world that they are now co-creating with her. This world is still hard work, you say, but each artistic discipline is now like a piece of a cosmic cartographer's map. A world-building enterprise, you say, that makes life less boring, full of more color and light and music, and crucially, you say, mystery. That's it.
Alrighty, so I will give people just a moment if they want to put any questions into the Q&A. There is one question, actually, that was just sent a moment ago that I could start you off with, Katie. They ask, interested to know when you first learned about Hildegard and what it was that initially drew you to her and her work. What values do you find in sharing her with students in the 21st century?
Thank you, Gregory, for that question. Gosh, interested when you know, one of the things that that I was searching for, that one of the things that connected me to Hildegard when I first found her, and this was many years ago now when I was still teaching at the University of Glasgow, is that I was gathering materials together for a course I wanted to teach on the relationship between medieval and digital culture, that started with a sense of thinking about some of the qualities of medieval life from sort of the artistic painting life into the theater life, the ways that theater, of course, is reborn in the medieval world, but on these pageant wagons that go through towns, and it's a very immersive performance form, and there's actors that aren't actors. There's a lot of contemporary performance conceits that we can see in the medieval world. So I started to think about that, but the more I was drawn into her, the more I started to think about sound. So it was, things that I had been, studying on my own outside of sort of scholarly settings in terms of sound that's usually talked about in relationship to Buddhism. The sound frequencies that are supposed to have very healing properties. These same frequencies are found in Gregorian chant, which is a big part of the Benedictine tradition. So that is that's what got me interested. And of course, she's a woman who is named in the medieval world as the first known dramatist of what then became our morality play tradition. And that tradition didn't get named that until a couple hundred years after she wrote Ordo Virtutum. So those are some of the values, but also as I was talking about, just that value of really taking seriously an internal reality, and what that might mean to sort of go with your intuition. Thank you, Gregory.
All right. Next question we have is, what's next for this work? Where do you want this to go, and what do you see it becoming?
So it is the first section of what I am imagining right now continues to be a kind of auto-fictional, for lack of a better word, novel, maybe. What it does is it's trying to use some of the tools that I teach that will be familiar to students if any are listening. The tools of dramatic analysis to sort of turn them inside out, to sort of find yourself in a shared story. So it begins with character study, but the next sort of section is talks about genre, and particularly the sort of medieval mystery play tradition. So it continues to sort of open up into these dramatic questions that also become questions for sort of personal exploration in relationship to the other artists that I've been studying. So that's where it is for now, but it's had a really wild and mysterious and rocky journey. So I won't be surprised if 6 months from now it's still that, or 6 months from now it's a performance. I don't know, but that's what I imagine.
All right. Next question. Hi, Katie. Wonderful talk. My question is both post-humanist and scenographic. Do characters and their actions really bring worlds into being? What is the role of the anchorage that reverberates the voice?
Could you read that one more time? It's a beautiful question.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Do characters and their actions really bring worlds into being? What is the role of the anchorage that reverberates the voice?
Yeah, it's such a great question. I mean, obviously, I'm not going to have anything like a straightforward answer for you, but I think that like what that question hints at is something that when I first started to think about, I need to go to this place, like I need to go to a monastery, something that was very much very much in my mind, which is that I do think actions bring worlds into being, but that the actions are not without a context. And so it didn't seem, this is a really roundabout way of saying it, but in the 4 days that I spent with the Good Sisters, what became very apparent to me in my short time there was, I mean, the quiet, the ritual, the reverberation that you talk about, but how it didn't seem all that surprising that she would have these visions. Do you know what I mean? In a way that in the secular world that we would think are just like, this is crazy, or we might psychologize it, or we might do. It just didn't seem all that surprising that an internal reality would be so capacious that it could manifest things in the outer world. Because of course that's the only way that things ever get manifested, is they start as an idea, and they go. And then they hit the external world. But I don't know if that answers your question, but the anchorage in the monastic setting, yes, has a lot to do with the creation of worlds.
All right. I can give folks another just moment if anybody else has any questions. I don't have anything lined up. But Katie, I also encourage you to take a look at what else is published. People made some really wonderful comments. So yeah, I can give folks a moment, and I guess, Bill, if you have any closing comments or...
I guess while we're still focused on Katie, as we should be, I'll just pipe in here and thank Katie for sort of a wonderful lecture, and for all that you do, Katie. You really are the epitome of a scholar teacher, and I think that came through today. So thank you very much, and my thanks to everybody who joined us this afternoon. This really is a wonderful honor. We aspire to be scholar teachers like Katie, and it's important that the college recognize excellence in this regard. So thank you again, Katie, and thank you, everyone.
Great. Thank you, Bill.